Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. I've always been someone who works hard and keeps a low profile. After 2 decades building my business consulting company, I finally reached a point where I could make some serious investments. That's when the opportunity to purchase the struggling golf resort in my area came up. The resort was a beautiful property with an 18-hole championship course, clubhouse, restaurant, and a residential community surrounding it. But financially, it was a disaster. Membership had declined, the facilities needed updating, and there was clearly tension between the residential community's HOA and the previous management. When I decided to buy it, my plan was simple: observe operations firsthand before making major changes. I didn't want employees or members treating me differently because I was the owner. I wanted to see the authentic experience. "Just treat me like a regular member for now," I told the general manager, one of the few people who knew about the ownership change. "I need to understand what's working and what isn't from the ground up." The purchase was completed through my holding company, and while there was a press release, my name wasn't prominently featured. Most members and residents just knew that new ownership had taken over. For the first few months, I'd visit once or twice a week, play a round of golf, have lunch at the clubhouse, and quietly observe. I noticed several issues immediately. The course maintenance was inconsistent, the restaurant service was slow, but most concerning was the way a small group of HOA members behaved like they owned the place. I'd overhear conversations about their club and how they'd fought to keep standards high. There seemed to be particular tension around public access and who was allowed on the course when. The HOA itself consisted of about 7 board members who represented the 120 homes in the community. From employee comments and my observations, a particular group of 3 board members had been becoming increasingly controlling about club operations, despite the fact that the HOA and the golf club were separate entities that merely shared the same general grounds. One Tuesday morning, about 4 months after I took ownership, I decided to play an early round. It was about 7:30 a.m., the weather was perfect, and being a weekday, the course was nearly empty. I dressed in my usual casual golf attire, nothing fancy. I don't believe in flashy clothes or accessories that scream, "Look at me." I was having a peaceful round until I reached the 7th hole. As I was lining up my shot, I heard the distinctive hum of an approaching golf cart being driven much too fast. "Excuse me!" a woman's voice called out sharply before I could take my swing. "Excuse me! I need to see your membership card immediately." I turned to see a woman probably in her 60s with an immaculate golf outfit, large sunglasses, and a small pin on her collar that read HOA Board. Her cart had Property Committee written on the side. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, lowering my club. "I'm just finishing this hole. Is there a problem?" She remained in her cart, looking down at me with obvious disdain. "We've had issues with non-members sneaking onto the course. I need to see your membership card now." I found this strange since I'd checked in at the pro shop where they knew who I was, but I remained polite. "I checked in at the pro shop already. They can verify I'm allowed to be here." Her expression hardened. "That's not how this works. Members carry their cards. It's policy. If you can't produce one, you'll need to leave." "I understand your concern about course security," I replied, "but the staff at the clubhouse knows me. I'm sure we can sort this out without interrupting my game." She scoffed. "Do you know how much residents pay for exclusive access to this course? We can't have just anyone wandering onto the property. This is a private club." "I'm well aware of the membership structure," I said, maintaining my composure. "And I assure you, I have every right to be here." "What's your name?" she demanded. "I'm on the HOA board and chair of the property committee. I oversee course access." I considered revealing my ownership right then, but something told me this was an opportunity to understand a deeper problem. My name is OP, and with all due respect, the HOA doesn't actually have authority over golf course operations or membership verification. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Her face flushed red. "How dare you tell me what authority I have? I've been on this board for 8 years. This course exists because our community supports it." She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling security, you're trespassing, and now being belligerent." I could hear her exaggerated description through the phone. "Yes, security? I'm on the 7th hole with an unauthorized individual who refuses to show credentials and is becoming aggressive. I need someone here immediately." By this point, another group of golfers had approached the tee box behind us and were watching the spectacle. I felt my face growing warm with embarrassment, despite knowing I had every right to be there. Within minutes, a golf cart with security emblazoned on the side arrived. The guard, a young man who looked barely out of his 20s, approached nervously. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Board Member?" he asked. I noticed he didn't appear to know my identity either, which was disappointing considering he was a resort security. "This person claims to be a member but refuses to show any ID or membership card," she said authoritatively. "He needs to be removed from the property immediately and his information documented so he can be properly banned." The security guard looked uncomfortable. "Sir, do you have your membership card with you?" "I don't carry it with me on the course," I replied truthfully. "But the pro shop checked me in earlier. You can verify with them." The woman interjected before the guard could respond. "That's completely unacceptable. The rules clearly state members must have cards on them at all times. He's breaking the rules and being confrontational about it." The guard looked torn between following procedure and avoiding conflict with a board member. "Sir, maybe we should go to the clubhouse to straighten this out," he suggested diplomatically. I considered my options. I could reveal my identity and end this immediately, but that would only address the symptom, not the disease. If this was happening to me, what was happening to regular members? "That's fine," I finally said. "I'll go to the clubhouse." As I gathered my clubs, the woman smiled triumphantly. "Make sure he's properly documented for trespassing," she instructed the guard. "The board will want to review this case." Rather than create more of a scene, I decided to leave with the security guard. As we drove back to the clubhouse, he seemed apologetic. "Sorry about this, sir. Mrs. Board Member can be persistent. She's reported several trespassers this month already." "Interesting," I remarked. "And do these reports typically result in actions against the supposed trespassers?" He nodded uncomfortably. "Usually a warning the first time, then a suspension of privileges if there's a second incident." At the clubhouse, I asked to speak to the general manager privately rather than create a scene. Once in his office, the GM was mortified to learn what had happened. "I am so sorry, sir. This is completely unacceptable. I'll address this with the HOA board immediately." "No," I said firmly. "Don't do anything yet. I want to see how this plays out through normal channels. Treat it exactly as you would if I weren't the owner." Reluctantly, he agreed. The next morning, I received an email that made my blood boil. Subject line, "Membership privileges suspended, incident review." The email detailed that, due to a serious breach of membership protocols and aggressive behavior toward an HOA board member, my club access was temporarily suspended pending review. It cited witness statements that claimed I had become belligerent when asked for proper identification and made threatening comments regarding the authority of the HOA. None of this was true. The woman had completely fabricated parts of our interaction. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a brief note. "Time to gather information. I want everything by the book." Over the next week, my team quietly investigated. What we uncovered was worse than I imagined. This wasn't just about one entitled board member. There was a systemic abuse of power happening. The HOA property committee had been reserving prime tea times under various names, then allowing their friends to use them without proper memberships. Several staff members reported being threatened with complaints to ownership if they didn't provide preferential treatment to certain board members. Membership applications from potential buyers outside the HOA community had been mysteriously lost or delayed after being forwarded to the HOA for courtesy review, a process that wasn't even officially part of the procedures. Security camera footage from the clubhouse showed the same board member who confronted me berating staff on multiple occasions. The final straw was discovering that the HOA board had begun requiring the previous management to submit operational decisions for their approval, despite having no legal authority to do so. 2 weeks after the incident, I called for an emergency community meeting. The announcement stated it would address recent membership concerns and clarify resort operations under new ownership. I requested all HOA board members be present. The evening of the meeting, the clubhouse banquet room was packed. I sat quietly in the back as the general manager opened the proceedings. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. As you know, the resort has been under new ownership for several months now. Tonight we have a representative from ownership to address some recent concerns and clarify operational policies moving forward." As I walked to the front of the room, I noticed the woman who had confronted me sitting in the front row with 2 other board members, all wearing their HOA pins prominently. She looked surprised to see me, but quickly leaned over to whisper something to her colleagues. "Good evening," I began. "My name is OP. Some of you may recognize me as the member who was recently removed from the 7th hole and subsequently had his membership privileges suspended. Murmurs spread through the audience, and I saw confusion on many faces. Before I address that specific incident, I'd like to share some findings from a review of club operations over the past few years. Using a prepared presentation, I methodically outlined the issues we'd discovered, carefully avoiding naming specific individuals but making the patterns clear. I presented membership numbers showing decline, financial statements indicating mismanagement, and anonymized accounts from staff about intimidation. The resort has been operating at a loss for years, I explained. And rather than addressing the core business issues, there appears to have been an unhealthy focus on restricting access and creating an exclusive atmosphere that has actually driven away potential revenue. The woman who had confronted me suddenly stood up. "This is preposterous. Who are you to come in here and make these accusations? You're the one who was caught trespassing and now you're trying to deflect." The moment had arrived. I paused, looking directly at her. I should properly introduce myself. I'm not just a representative of the new ownership. I am the new owner. My company purchased this resort 4 months ago. The room fell silent. The woman's mouth literally dropped open. That's impossible," she stammered. "We would have been informed. The HOA has approval rights for any ownership change." "Actually, you don't," I replied calmly. "The HOA has no legal authority over the golf club's ownership or operations. They are separate legal entities. The HOA authority extends only to the residential areas and enforcement of community covenants for homeowners." I continued before she could interrupt again. "The incident on the 7th hole was unfortunate but illuminating. It demonstrated exactly the kind of overreach and misrepresentation of authority that has been harming this club." I clicked to the next slide, which showed the security footage from our interaction. While there was no audio, it clearly showed a calm conversation on my part, and increasingly aggressive gesturing from her. As you can see, at no point was I aggressive or threatening, contrary to what was reported in my membership suspension notice. The woman's face had turned a deep shade of red. "You were deliberately misleading. You should have identified yourself as the owner." "Why?" I asked simply. "So I could receive special treatment?" The point was to experience the club as any member would, and what I experienced was harassment, false accusations, and punitive action without due process. I turned back to the audience. "Effective immediately, I'm implementing several changes to restore proper operations and rebuild a healthy club culture." I outlined the changes: a clear organizational chart separating HOA responsibilities from club operations, new membership cards with digital verification to prevent abuse, a transparent tee time system that prevented block reservations, a membership committee with diverse representation, not just HOA board members, a new code of conduct for all members with clear procedures for addressing concerns. Finally, I said, I'm requesting the immediate resignation of any HOA board members who have been involved in misrepresenting their authority over club operations or abusing membership privileges. The woman who had confronted me stood up again, this time visibly shaking. "This is outrageous! We've dedicated years to this community. You can't just come in and demand resignations." An older gentleman in the back stood up. "Actually, he can demand whatever he wants. He owns the place. And speaking as a resident for 12 years, I for one am relieved. Some of us have been intimidated into silence for too long. That opened the floodgates. Suddenly, residents were speaking up about their own experiences, describing how they'd been afraid to challenge the board for fear of social ostracism or having their own membership privileges questioned. By the end of the evening, 3 HOA board members, including my 7th hole adversary, had stormed out. The remaining board members agreed to hold new elections within 30 days and to work collaboratively with club management to restore proper boundaries. 6 months later, the transformation was remarkable. Membership had increased by 15%, revenue was up, and the atmosphere at the club was noticeably more welcoming. The new HOA board, more diverse in age and background, focused on appropriate community matters rather than trying to control the golf club. As for my former adversary, I heard through the grapevine that she had listed her house for sale. I wasn't surprised, but I took no pleasure in it. The goal had never been personal victory, just proper governance. One day, as I was finishing a round, I saw her approaching the clubhouse as I was leaving. Our eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, she walked over. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I misunderstood my role and overstepped my bounds." "Apology accepted," I replied simply. "The club is doing well now. That's what matters." She nodded curtly and walked away. I watched her go, reflecting on how entitlement can blind people to their own behavior. The best revenge wasn't in humiliating her or forcing her out. It was in creating a fair system where everyone played by the same rules. The resort continues to thrive today. I still play regularly, sometimes recognized, sometimes not, but everyone gets treated with the same respect, whether they own the place or are just visiting for the day. And that, more than any profit margin, is the true measure of our success. The next one is a pro-revenge story from a good friend who lives in South America. Not my story, hers. This happened about 16 years ago. My friend, let's call her Maria, had been dating a guy called Oscar for 2.5 years or so when she found out on the grapevine, if you live in a small town you'll understand, that Oscar had betrayed her. He'd been to a party, got a girl drunk, and slept with her. News of his actions had spread as gossip does. The worst part of it was that it seemed that it wasn't the first time that it had happened by a long shot. Well, Maria heard and plotted revenge. She invited him to her flat for a special afternoon of fun with her and her friend Vanessa. Oscar could not resist temptation, so he went. Picture the scene. He goes into the building where she lives, gets into the lift to go up to the 10th floor to get to her apartment. He rings the bell. He can hear music playing from behind the door. She opens the door and he walks in and sees that both his girlfriend Maria, her friend Vanessa, are there, each wearing a sexy silk negligee. Maria is holding a blindfold and tells him to wear it. He agrees and she puts it on him and tells him to strip naked. While he was busy, Vanessa put her clothes back on, walked out the apartment, leaving a doorstop to keep the door open, and called the lift. That's an elevator to you Americans. She then walked back in, grabbed Oscar's clothes, and threw them out the window into the car park below. She then left the apartment and went down the stairs, ringing doorbells as she descended. Maria had been leading Oscar around the apartment, disorienting him, and then led him out the apartment, closed the door behind her, and got in the lift alone, calling him an unfaithful a-hole whose clothes are in the car park before the lift doors closed. Oscar ripped off the blindfold and must have realized how ducked he was as he had to walk down 10 flights of stairs buck naked, passing laughing neighbors all the way. He collected his clothes and Maria never saw him again. Edit for clarity. Maria went on the lift alone and held it open on the ground floor. Neighbors on the 10th floor had come out to see Oscar, setting him to walk down the stairs, thereby making it worse as Vanessa was going down the stairs, alerting as many people as possible. Also, people followed him outside, so he had to dress with an audience. The humiliation. The next one is a malicious compliances story. This happened about a week and a half ago. I was taking a walk in a small park that has a wooded area in and a few walking trails. I decided I wanted to take the shortest path as it was getting late. About halfway through the path, I saw a skunk in the middle of the path, and I am sure based on the title, most people already know where this is going. I turned around and decided it was not worth it to proceed further, and approximately halfway was enough. I exited the path the same way I entered, and as I was entering, I saw an old teacher of mine from high school. Let's call her Miss Samantha, not her real name. Miss Samantha was a teacher that went out of her way to nitpick everything I did in her class in high school. Note, it has been almost 12 years since I last saw her and 13 since I was in her class. Anyway, with the backstory aside, I went up to greet her and said, "Hello, Miss Samantha, have you been—" "Hi, I'm trying to take my daily walk down shortest path. Don't bother me." "I wouldn't—" "You said, hello, this conversation is over until I get back from my walk, or you can walk with me and we can catch up. I just want to warn, this conversation is over for now. Wait until I finish my walk and we can catch up, understand, Jumping Crow Joker 24? At this point, I think for a moment, I am not the type of person who would normally just let someone walk into a potential skunking, but she was just rude to me twice and did nitpick everything I did in high school, so I chose to say nothing and just took a seat at the bench nearby. See, was that so hard? We don't need to be a know-it-all. That was your issue back as a student. And Miss Samantha went down that path. As she did, I whipped out my phone and tested my parents that I'd be heading back to my childhood home a bit late. We'll help them with the dog later, but eat dinner without me. I'll be here for a bit longer. One thing to take into account is that the entrance and exit for the shortest path, we have exit parallel to each other. The entrance is on one side of the bench I sat at, and the other side was the exit. In this case, entrance behind, exit in front, so family can wait on the bench and see their relatives exit. Normally, I knew I'd see her on the way out if she'd complete the whole route, but in this case, I had a feeling I'd smell her coming out first, knowing her attitude. Sadly, my instincts were spot on. As I am on my phone playing a few games, I heard Miss Samantha's voice vaguely in the background, and my thought at the time was, "Oh no, she ran into the skunk, here we go." And I do not joke that just as I finished my thought, I heard the sound of a woman yell. Maybe a scream, I couldn't really make that out 100%, but the wind was blowing my way, so I was downwind of the path, the skunk and her, so it wasn't long before I could smell what happened. Miss Samantha did eventually come out from the path's exit, and the smell she was emitting was awful. It reminded me a bit of raw horseradish getting peeled, as it was really eye-watering. She moaned. I tried to warn you about that skunk. I figured it out when I got sprayed. You knew I'd react like that, didn't you? I shrugged. I wagered a guess, yeah. By the way, mine taking a few steps downwind, so it is easier to talk. After that, she gave me her phone number and asked me to contact her when I planned to come back. She hoped it wouldn't be when she was still reeking in skunk odor. As I said at the beginning of this tale, it has been a week and a half. She still has some lingering skunk smell. I found out that up until that moment, she was doing okay as well, but she also told me she got sprayed twice. When I asked her why she did not turn back after being sprayed the first time, she told me if she already got sprayed and was going to smell like skunk anyway, she wanted to complete her walk. A fun little anecdote is that after everything, she admitted she was being petty, and when I told her I still wanted to study the foreign language she taught and took some classes in college, she told me that if I ever wanted to practice to let her know, and she'll do it without the pettiness this time. To be honest, I think the skunking humbled her quite a bit, and hopefully she won't be forced to deal with residual linger odor much longer. But anyway, thanks for reading. The next one is an entitled people story. This event happened a couple years ago, in 2023, I think, before the 4th of July. Now, we did not encounter the Karen of this story ourselves, and my dad and I didn't see much of what happened, but we were filled in on the details, so this story is told from different points of view. So, a couple years ago, my family and I were doing some work out in the backyard. At one point, we got hungry and we decided to buy some Burger King with some coupons that I had. So my dad and I left the house in his car to go get BK. I was simply looking out the window, looking at the cute little American flags that were pinned down along the sidewalk to celebrate the 4th of July. A bit of info about these flags. I don't know how many places in the US do this, but the city I live in does this annual thing where they pin small USA flags along the sidewalk down one street, from one end all the way down to the other, to celebrate the 4th of July. I've lived next to this street all my life, and as far as I've known, or as far as I can remember, my street is the only one that has done such a thing. Again, I don't know how many cities in the US do this. This is just the one I'm most familiar with. The point is, though, these flags belong to the city, not to individual homeowners, so I'm sure one would be arrested, fined if they were caught stealing or damaging them. Anyway, as we were coming back, driving down our street towards our house, I noticed some of these USA flags knocked down along the sidewalk. It wasn't just one or two flags, it was a ton of them. So many flags knocked down along the sidewalk, stretching for nearly a mile. We started wondering what might have caused them to fall down. Either the city did a poor job pinning them down, or some strong gust of wind came out and blew several of them down. We got our answer when we arrived home. There was a police car on the street across from our house. My mom was still in the yard, and she had seen what happened. We asked her about it, and she told us that some woman in a motorized wheelchair was running over these small US flags, and now the police have come to arrest her. Well, that's the most info we got out of the situation. We didn't go to the police across the street to ask for any other details, as it was pretty much none of our business. But I couldn't help but wonder why that woman had done such a thing. Was she playing a game of knocking down the flags, thinking it was no big deal if they got destroyed? Was she possibly intoxicated while driving her motorized wheelchair, which I think counts as drunk driving? Or did she simply hate America and decided to knock down the flags under protest? Either way, in my head, I just nicknamed her the non-patriotic Karen for knocking down lots of little American flags with her motorized vehicle. I didn't hear any screams or shrieks from the woman, so I reckon she didn't put up much of a fight or argument over her actions, but I'm sure she was a Karen. After all, she knocked down nearly a mile's worth of little flags down one sidewalk in a wheelchair. This had to be intentional. This couldn't have been an accident, which rules out the drunk driving theory I had earlier. I might never know why, but it's quite an amusing story, considering my dad and I only saw the aftermath of what went down while we were getting our BK meal. Update. So it appears this post of mine has irritated lots of people based on the fact that I know nothing about the woman in the wheelchair, and just assumed she was a Karen based on her actions. Really, there could be a number of reasons she did what she did, and we have no info about who she is or why she did what she did. So my post is not really reliable. This was all poor judgment on my part. I am sorry for wasting everyone's time with a huge assumption. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.